So you're probably familiar with the format. It's a way of introducing some potentially serious ideas in a very, very light-hearted format. So what happens is each of these people gets a grand total of 3 minutes to propose their suggestion for the best invention ever. Then, after they've all had their 3 minutes, you will get a very brief chance to put some very brief questions or arguments about who you think should win, and then we take a vote, and then at that point basically the 3 lowest scoring people get tipped out of the balloon, and then the final 3 people get a minute each, and then you get to vote again, and the last person gets to stay in the balloon and wins the honour and glory of having nominated the best invention ever. I'm going to simply introduce each person and then let them all speak. So starting from this end, we have Tim Abrahams, who set up Machine Books in 2014, and coincidentally, is defending the book. Not everybody is being that blatant about their choice of invention, by the way. I tried to look up some dirt on the internet to undermine him in his introduction, but there isn't any. He's a former editor of Blueprint, he's been a visiting scholar in Canada and an architectural journalist, and has written a book about the stadium. So he's obviously a squeaky clean character, and you should take him very seriously. Next to him is Emily Dinsmore, who's a project administrator of the Physics Factory and an undergraduate physics student at Queen Mary University of London. She confessed she was feeling nervous because she's never spoken before, but I'm guessing that she means she's never spoken to a public audience before. Otherwise, she was doing really well to put her first sentence together at the age of whatever she is. She's defending Marconi's radio telegraph. Immediately on my right, we have Amber McCleary, the founder director of Copper Clothing, which is about using antimicrobial fabric which is impregnated in copper to kill microbes. So that's very exciting. She's also, this is like in her spare time, she's also doing a BSc in forensic psychology at the University of Portsmouth, which probably means that she's going to use some really cunning psychological trick to get you to vote for her. And her invention is copper. I'm not actually sure it's an invention, but we'll let that pass for now. The audience can be the judge of that. Then on my left, we have Dominic Standish. He lives in the Venice region of Italy. He's a lecturer at the University of Iowa, which is not the world's longest commute. They actually have an outpost near Venice. He's the author of Venice in Environmental Peril. So you might think he was going to choose an invention like barrages, but no, he's going to choose language. Probably, having lived in Italy for a number of years, a subject close to your heart. Next along we have Simon Wild, who spent 15 years working for science and health organisations like NICE and the MRC, and so he's obviously got a keen interest in science, importance of science and medicine, communicating to the public. His invention is clinical trials. By the way, in his spare time he can be found on the fiddle in the violin section of Fulham Symphony Orchestra. And finally, at the far end, we have Martin Wright, a writer and consultant on sustainability and the environment, and founding director of Forum for the Future in India. India is where I first met him, where hypocritically he'd arrived by aeroplane. Hello. And he'll be defending the mobile telephone. So, I have a stopwatch. I'm hoping I can work out how to use it, because Tim Abrahams, your 3 minutes starts now.
What was not mentioned in my introduction is actually Machine Books, the company I work for, is actually involved in digital publication. So if Timandra had wanted to be particularly undermining to me, she could have pointed out that why on earth would someone who is involved in digital publishing be championing the book? But I'm championing it not because of any kind of tech entrepreneur, art of war, respect the opposition approach. It's because I'm a great fan of the book. I'm arguing for the book in all its forms. I'm not a major fan of the books before the 15th century. I like the pictures in them. I find them very hard to read and quite difficult to get hold of. I'm talking about the book as a technology for delivering information. It's good to think of a book as an invention. It's a blessed relief to talk about it as an invention, because normally when I tell people that I'm involved in digital publishing, I see the look on their faces as if you've suggested going into their house and ripping out all of their favourite books and trampling on them. Far from that, I am actually see the digital publication in a long and illustrious history. The core of the argument for the book, though, does go back to the period just immediately in the 15th century when it's invented. Of course, one of the main things we immediately assume, and it is indeed correct, is that dissemination is the best quality of the printing press. Information, ideas are able to be disseminated throughout the world. That is, of course, true. But one of the interesting aspects of dissemination is the knowledge that it brings, and it's seen as the vessel of knowledge. The story goes that the businessman Johann Faust, who lent money to Gutenberg, it was assumed that he was actually the model for Faust, the character who spent his time involved in indulging himself in information and how threatening that was. Cross-referencing, that was the culture of debate. That was the thing that the book really engendered, and that's what I believe is the truly great quality of it. The Renaissance is as much about placing all of the information that had hitherto been gathered in front of an audience and letting them work out the contradictions, starting, not work it out, but begin the discussion of working out the contradictions. It's about removing errors. One thinks of the so-called Wicked Bible produced in the 1630s. Perhaps this is not the case. The Wicked Bible unfortunately missed out the word not from the thou shalt not commit adultery. But it was easily and quickly solved. It wasn't an accidental mistake, and things improved and went forward. Improving. David Hume said, the power which printing gives us of continually improving and correcting our works is the advantage of that art. I will hopefully be able to finish what I had to say in the next row.
Okay, Tim Abrahams in the book.
Thank you.
Showing how short 3 minutes is when you're speaking. So, next up, defending Marconi's radio telegraph, we have Emily Dinsmore. Go!
I'd like us to imagine a world mostly horse-drawn and coal-fired, where great cities like London and New York have only recently winced at the brightness of electric light. This is 1897, and the young Italian engineer Marconi is on the cusp of an invention so remarkable that the world will be utterly changed in its wake. That invention was the wireless telegraph, and no other has propelled humanity forward to anything like the same degree. When radio waves were first discovered, people didn't realise their uses, and it was Marconi who tried bouncing radio waves off the atmosphere in much the same way as reflecting light from a mirror. If this could be done, signals could be sent around the Earth at rapid speeds. Communication between continents could become like communication in the next room. Until this point, it was thought that radio waves travelled in straight lines, and so that they could not travel beyond the horizon. But Marconi's daring literally pushed the horizon back. His vision opened up a whole new horizon. His invention becomes the most perfect poetic symbol of the scientific endeavour itself, which is to expand the human horizon. The worlds before and after the invention of wireless communication were virtually irreconcilable. Once it became possible to send a transatlantic message, then came the need to get crisper and crisper signals, and this drove the development of the electronic valve, the forerunner to the electric transistor, which is at the heart of all of modern electronics. If we live in an age of information, it is Marconi who invented it. It was because of the radio telegraph that news of the Titanic disaster spread across continents within hours, compared with, for example, the official news of the Battle of the Waterloo, which took a little over 3 days to reach England. Think about the importance of wireless to the home front and the Allied forces in the Second World War, and what would you prefer in a storm at sea, navigating by the stars and the lighthouses, or wireless global positioning? Marconi's broadcasting system became the BBC, for he invented the principles of broadcasting. And if the revolution happens, it will be televised, and that will be because of Marconi. Even the internet is not really the child of Tim Berners-Lee, it is the child of Marconi because it simply articulates his original insight. People say that the photograph of the Earth from space from the Apollo missions created the global village, but of course it is with Marconi's transatlantic message that this first begins. In a very real sense, Marconi shrunk the world, and how many other inventors represented here can claim that?
And you shrunk the 3 minutes to 2.5 minutes, so I don't know if you get extra points for that, but very well done. So, next up with the invention of copper. I'm still not sure it's invention, but I'm sure you're going to prove me wrong. We have Amber McCleary. Off you go.
Hello. Well, it's not actually the copper I've invented. Obviously, when you think of copper, I'm sure you will think of a metal, piping, for example, that copper is used for. My actual invention is to infuse fabrics with copper. And the reason behind this is for antimicrobial properties. So, for example, things like MRSA can actually be defeated by copper. You may not have known this before, but ancient Romans and Greeks have been using copper for a long, well, obviously centuries ago, to purify things like water. So it has been known to have these kind of properties, antimicrobial properties and purifying properties. But nowadays, we don't really use copper for those reasons, other than maybe in our piping in our houses. So what I've done is I have actually found a technology to infuse fabrics with copper. So now the copper is actually in the fabric for the life of the fabric, and it cannot wash out. This can be compared to things like silver. There's silver products that are used for the same sort of reasons, but the difference is that silver can wash out of fabrics, and it's also damaging to wildlife when it enters the water. The difference is copper doesn't have that effect. As humans, we do actually have copper within our bodies, and we need copper to survive. So, based on this, copper will not have any adverse effects on the human body. There's only one particular type of illness called Wilson's syndrome that actually where the body isn't able to metabolize copper, and is very rare. It's a very rare syndrome. So bearing this in mind, with my fabrics, what I have actually done is developed a number of products, including pajamas, bed sheets, and various other. What I'm aiming to do at the moment is infuse copper into wound dressings and things to be used in hospitals and other clinical settings. My fabrics are actually under trial at the moment by Croydon University Hospital to be used in wound dressings and for maternity pads as well, because during birth and labour, it is a time where the body is vulnerable to a lot of diseases and things like that, and infection. The ability to be able to use them in a hospital setting will also have a major impact on the big issue that we have now of resistance. And like we're in a time now where antibiotics don't really have the effect that they had. There is a lot of resistance nowadays. So we need to think of new ways of trying to conquer these things. And another thing is microbes and viruses can never become resistant to copper. Copper will kill them.
Amber there. Easy, Tiger. Seriously upping the game there by having actually invented the invention herself. Giving her a slightly unfair advantage over the other panellists, I think. But still, let's see. There's 3 of them to go. Let's see what they can do. So, with language, and aptly using language to defend language, Dominic.
More precisely, I'm defending recursion in language, which is the ability of humans to insert one idea into another, i.e. the man in the top hat and the man is walking down the street can be changed into the man in the top hat is walking down the street. According to Noam Chomsky, this is universal to human language and is unique to humans. It enables us to create new meanings from a very limited range of sounds and rules. I'm not being unkind to animals here. Animals can understand aspects of language. Dog fetch the bone. They can reproduce sounds. Parrots, killer whales can identify in-group and out-group with sounds. But animals are unable to understand the construction of language and create new language, which is unique to humans. Now, my invention is the best invention because no human invention can work in isolation, and every human invention requires language. Every human invention builds on previous ideas and inventions, and language is necessary to both to compete and cooperate with people in other locations. Robert Winston wrote the book Bad Ideas, A History of Our Inventions, and he argued no language equals no invention. Language is the key to our sense of separation from the environment. It allows us to think about the past, the present, and the future, and to imagine what if. Without language, we're unable to do that. Of course, language is not just about the book, it's also about the song, the opera, the theatre, and speech. And that is why free speech is so vital to defend. We need language, and it's the best invention, because that's why we're here, and that's what we're doing.
So next up, with clinical trials. By the way, you are randomised to this room. There's another identical room halfway around the corridor with a broadly similar audience, not listening to a balloon debate. I'm afraid the bad news is they're having a better time so far. So on that note, defending clinical trials, Simon.
So as Tamandra said, my choice for the greatest invention ever is the clinical trial, and more specifically, as Tamandra has also mentioned, the randomised control trial. And I think for an invention like this, it's something that Richard Peto, who was a famous epidemiologist from Oxford, kind of put it into context when he said that what we needed to do in medical research was ask an important question and answer it reliably. And it's the clinical trial, or more specifically the RCT, that enables to do that. And the invention itself, the actual way in which you do a clinical trial is one aspect of it. But I think what it signifies, the RCT, is the way in which we use science, and I'll come along to that in a second. So it's difficult to know who exactly invented the clinical trial, which may make being thrown out of a balloon a little bit more difficult. But probably the first ever kind of reference for trials was actually in the Bible, in the book of Daniel. And King Nebuchadnezzar ordered people to only drink wine and eat meat, which I know which part of the trial that I would like to have been in. But some of his noble courtiers disagreed with him, which was probably quite a dangerous thing to do in biblical times with a king. But they said that they preferred to eat vegetables. So what he did was he allowed them to eat vegetables, and he put the rest of his subjects on a wine and meat diet. 10 days later, it was clear that the people who were on the vegetables were having a much better time of it. I can't believe that for a second. And so that was probably the first ever example of a clinical trial, a trial being taken place. The first kind of controlled clinical trial was probably James Lind, who was a ship's surgeon in the 1700s. And he put sailors who were having scurvy through a set of various different circumstances. One group got given a litre of cider a day. Again, I don't know which arm I'd want to be in that. Some of them got a dose of weak sulfuric acid. Some of them got vinegar. Some had 2 pints of seawater to drink. And the final group got oranges and lemons to eat. And of course, the rest is history in terms to scurvy. Fast forward to the 1940s, the first randomised controlled trial. A guy called Austin Bradford Hill was someone who introduced a lot of the kind of statistical methods into doing it. Nowadays, there's over 200,000 clinical trials registered on the American website where you have to register trials anyway. It's a £30 billion industry. And as I say, it's the idea of doing a trial is an example of where we've left the old ideas of conjecture and everything else like that behind, and actually started to apply reason and rigour to what we do. So that's why I think we should vote for the clinical trial.
Now, Simon, the clinical trial. And finally, to my far left, possibly, defending the mobile phone, Martin.
Thank you. Yes, this little bastard, we've all got one. Quite a useful thing, I'm sure you'd agree. But there's one thing that tips it over the edge into being the best invention ever, and that is that has the potential to put power in the hands of the powerless. Now, as Tamandra mentioned, I've been working in India and the Indian subcontinent the last few years. Mobiles spreading like wildfire there. And there's a good reason that, because they are such a transformation technology. They help tilt the playing field towards the poor. Now, I was in Bangladesh in the Sundarbans, low-lying islands just off the Bay of Bengal one evening a little while ago. Absolutely beautiful, quite gorgeous, sun going down, birds floating on the horizon, a couple of fishermen paddling their skiffs back, smoke rising from the thatched roof of the village, you get the picture. Totally peaceful, utterly quiet. And I realised that at my back, the only thing I could hear was da-da-da-da, 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 beep, 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 beep. Fucking brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. This is exactly what I wanted to hear. This was the sound of a remote rural backwater being plugged into the global economy, and the difference it was making to people's lives in terms of access to information about their fishing, about prices, about all sorts of things, was extraordinary. And one fisherman was telling me the difference of life before they had mobiles and after they had mobiles. He said before they had mobiles, he used to go out in his skiff and he used to get his catch, hot sun beating down, had to take it to the nearest harbour, accept whatever price the guy there was willing to offer him, because otherwise the fish would spoil, he'd get nothing. Now, what he does is he goes out, he gets his catch, and he sits offshore, and he talks to this guy, and he talks to that guy, and he talks to that guy, and he finds out who's going to give him the best price. And he said at a stroke, having one of these things, it had more than doubled his income. So they'd done various things. They got a bigger solar panel, so they got more lights, so their kids could study at night, their kids could get an education, they could get a ticket out of poverty. The women felt safer, because the women could carry a mobile around them around the village at night. There was even a sexual harassment helpline for women, staffed by local women in the nearest little market town. So the transformation had been extraordinary. Now, as I say, many reasons why this is useful, but the one thing that tips it over into the best invention ever, it puts power in the hands of the powerless. Thank you.
Thank you. The mobile phone has enabled every poor fisherman to say, "I'm on the boat!"
Oh, and they do.
So, what happens now is you get a chance to put, you can put points or questions. I'm going to give these guys a very, very brief chance to come back on your points and also have a brief go at each other. When I've given them a chance to come back, you'll get to vote, and 3 of these people will go plummeting from our imaginary balloon to land on some poor fisherman's boat in the middle of the ocean, I expect. So, who would like to... good, okay.
Given that you were using a mobile phone to read off, shouldn't I not vote for the gentleman at the other end?
Doesn't the mobile phone just connect to a mobile data network, which is really radio waves? So it's just one device that connects to it.
I love this. So the book depends on the mobile phone, but the mobile phone depends on Marconi, okay?
So yeah, that actually leads on to my point. A couple of members of the panel have basically said, my invention's the best because it leads to other inventions. I think that's quite a moot point. I could stand at the front and say, I think agriculture's the best invention. All of you are wrong, because none of your inventions are possible without mine. So I want to know why your invention has its own intrinsic value. Why is it good on its own?
Wow, that's a profound question.
Great speech by Dominic, but I'm a little bit concerned actually, rather than copper being the discovery, you could make the argument that language isn't really an invention. It kind of develops as humanity develops. Who invented language? You know, which group of people invented language?
Oh, language, invented or discovered?
The mobile phone solved loads of problems, but it also caused some because it drew more people to the screens and less from chatting.
I was just thinking with the language, one thing I think is important to note is that mathematics is in itself a form of language, and without mathematics, a lot of the scientific discoveries, especially clinical trials, and these testing of things like copper, mobile phones, electricity, a lot of these rely on mathematics to work, so without the mathematical element of language, none of these things would be possible. That's my opinion. So
I would sort of go with you on the end there if you'd said the Gutenberg Press, but you said the book, and then you sort of said, here's loads of books I don't like. So I think you're out the balloon, because you didn't go for the press that changed the way books were produced, but you went for the book itself.
So 30 seconds, off you go, Marty. Reply to anything or just have a go at your rivals.
Yeah, the mobile phone is annoying, but the transformational effect it's had on people. If you told somebody 25 years ago that in a few years' time the average Bangladeshi fisherman would have a communications and information device of a range and sophistication we could only dream of, they would think this was science fiction or you're mindlessly optimistic. Invention, lots of different inventions, but an invention's got to be something quite new and exciting and tangible, hasn't it? So that's why I think, you know, with respect to my fellow panellists, language, book.
Good. Yes, I think you made your point admirably. Okay, Simon. off
Well,
you go.
I think if we're going to take this very reductionist approach, then I might change my invention to the Big Bang, because then everyone else is, I'm basically saying if my invention hadn't been created, then none of us would exist, and I think that's probably the thing that trumps that. But anyway, the intrinsic value of an invention rather than what it's led on to. I think, again, there's two things about the clinical trial. One is that it allows us to know what the best treatments for people are, and not rely on kind of what people think or assume to be the case. And secondly, it's an embodiment of the scientific principle, which is that we don't just take things on trust. We actually find out for ourselves.
Dominic.
So 3 questions on language. Yes, language is good on its own in great speeches, poetry, song and theatre, in addition to aiding other inventions. Secondly, on maths, yes, we started to communicate before we had the discipline of mathematics, so that answers your question. Third point, language is a human creation, not a discovery. It is obviously created by humans, and therefore, as Robert Winston argues in his great book of inventions, it is a human invention. And
There you go. Well, you might get a chance to come back if you're lucky. I'm sorry, the power's going to my head now. Okay, so Amber, 30 seconds. Off you go.
Okay, I didn't have any direct question, but I'd just like to say that although some inventions may come from something else, it's all about what I feel is important now is how the newest invention is going to change the world, how the newest invention is going to impact us in the best way. So although inventions may come from one thing or another, I think it's important to think about how it can impact the future.
And within time, excellent, top marks.
So the intrinsic value of the invention, Marconi's radio telegraph, enabled a universal human culture. It took us from a world in which people were just kind of concerned with local things, weren't able to communicate, to sort of, overnight almost, international communications, wireless communications at the speed of light. I think that's pretty amazing and probably, or is, the best invention.
Okay, good point, well made.
Whilst definitely Marconi helped make communication spontaneous and quick, it was already international in terms of the book. The book was disseminated widely. Yes, I do have a preference for a particular period and style of book, but the book it still remains of intrinsic value, which I totally agree with you. Reading and enjoying a book is absolutely the highest enjoyment that we can have on our own, nearly.
In the nick of time there, I think.
What's that red card for?
Okay, so just in terms of the language issue, I mean, if we say that it's a creation, then surely nothing on that panel could have been created without it. I mean, that's a conclusion you'd have to draw, unless anybody else could argue against that. Surely the bottom line is, without language, could the book have been written? Could the radar at the Marconi's radio have done? Could you have communicated about copper? And so it goes on. So I'd like to hear an argument against that, because I don't think it's coming out, to be frank.
I agree with someone that said already, it's not an invention of the human mind, it's embodied in our body. It's like ants also can communicate, whales can communicate, everyone can communicate. Every one of these species has their own language. It was already a biological thing. So it's not an invention of a human mind. So for me, this is a very different thing.
For me, the interest in this discussion is not so much the individual inventions, but understanding how interconnected everything is and the complexity of the transformation of something from being an invention into something being socialized to being an innovation and having a transformative effect on society. So I would be most interested in the speakers or the advocates telling us something about that we didn't know that will help us think about how to be more inventive or innovative in future.
Thanks. This lady here has just tipped me over in favour of language, because I think she's confusing communication and language. Yes, lots of animals can communicate, but communication is limited, language is unlimited.
I think, it seems really clear that language is sort of the prime mover of all these other inventions, whether or not it is an invention. However, I think Amber's point about looking to the future Esperanto failed. Is language doing more to connect us now, or is it doing more to divide us? Where is language going, or is it just chugging along and it's kind of not really developed much from, I don't know, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago?
You're kind of both stuck in it, really, because without the dictionary, all your languages are incomprehensible. So.
I'm going to be really kind and give you a minute to come back, but use it wisely and well, and preferably cheap point scoring against your opponents. Because remember, basically, you're about to have an audience vote, so this is your one chance for some populist rabble-rousing.
Robert Wilson was it who said language is an invention. I'm kind of more with Darwin, who talks about it evolving from the instinctive cries of man. Let me tell you a quick story. Abraham Ortelius, creator of the first modern atlas, did so in the knowledge that he published. It was not complete, but he invited the user to come, invited people to and respond with their own versions of the map. This is sometimes used as the idea that a model for Wikipedia. It's nonsense. It's the model for the book. The book is about resolving something, completing something, discovering something, finishing it, then handing it out to the world for other individuals to go through the process of understanding, appreciating, logically arguing, and resolving and passing back. That's why you should vote for it.
Excellent. Okay, Emily.
Okay, so why Marconi's radio telegraph is the best invention and better than language. Language is not actually an invention. There is no inventor. It's not tied to a specific moment in time. I feel like to be the best invention, those two things are kind of prerequisite. Also, without Marconi's radio telegraph, language is just kind of limited to these small pockets across the world, and it was the radio telegraph that opened this up, that actually took those small communities and suddenly created this universal ability to communicate really quickly, instantly, and brought together the world. It shrunk the globe. So that's all.
Amber.
Although we have mentioned the fact that some inventions have come from others again, I still am strong about my point in that we need to look towards the future. So yes, perhaps the education that we have might have come from books. I still believe that my invention, well, let me say this in a certain way, not my invention of actual copper, but my invention of copper clothing is actually a great product. And I do think that looking forward, I think it will have a major, major impact on our lives. How many people go into a hospital and are worried that they're going to come out with something else other than what they went in there for in the first place? Something like that can be eradicated just by using things like copper in hospitals or in other clinical settings. And I think that's really important for the well-being of the nation, really. And globally, it can help massive issues that we have globally. And just to mention one, things like malaria and other various diseases, it can have a massive impact on all of them.
You just about got malaria out in time. Okay, Dominic?
Okay, so language is not biological. We are not born with language. We develop language and we learn it. We don't need a dictionary to learn language. We can do it without a dictionary, although it might be helpful later on. Language doesn't have an inventor. It's not precise. It evolved over time after our ancestors came out of the trees and worked in groups and developed language to use tools and hunt bigger animals than they could hunt on their own. But it is definitely a human creation. You know, if you talk about Marconi and many of the other inventions you're talking about, Marconi built on previous inventions using language. Without language, he couldn't have done it. Finally, on the cell phone and the book, without language, neither have anything to say.
Very good, excellent.
Having language as being the winning kind of thing, it goes against, I think, the spirit and the letter of this whole balloon debate. And frankly, I don't want to be in a balloon that language is the winner of. You said yourself...
You've already conceded.
You said yourself, language doesn't have an inventor, so therefore it cannot be an invention. So you've kind of sunk yourself below the waterline there already, so I don't need to say anymore.
Okay, they are. Martin?
Yeah, part of the thrill of inventions is the genius of somebody coming up with a dead cool idea, which language is so far lost in the mists of time. It can hardly inspire us to go on to other things. And in any case, I've got two words for you. Emoticons and emojis. You've got such a second millennial invention there, you'll be way out of date soon. Mobile phones may be extremely annoying. I mean, everyone complains about people looking at them in pubs instead of talking to each other. But if you think back far enough to the days before mobiles, people just sit there, you know, staring into their pints, old couples not talking to each other. At least now they can show each other pictures of cats, for God's sake. What could be sweeter than that? Thank you.
Okay, so audience, now is your chance to vote 3 of these people out of the balloon and watch them whistle down to the oceans below. You're voting for them to stay in, and the ones with the lowest number of votes get thrown out.
People get more than one vote.
You can vote as many times as you like, but remember, if you vote for all of them, then your votes become kind of useless. So you can vote for everybody, nobody, or any number of people in between. If you think that Tim should at least stay in the balloon long enough to give you another minute on why the book is the best invention ever, put your hand up now. So next, if you think that Emily should stay in the balloon with Marconi's radio telescope at least one more round, put your hands up now. Oh, it's looking good for the radio telegraph. Okay, so if you think that Amber should stay in the balloon with her invention of copper-infused clothing, put your hands up now. If you think Dominic should stay in the balloon with language for another round, put your hands up now. Well, I suppose what you expect from an audience of people who've come for a weekend of debate. Okay, if you think that Simon should stay in the balloon with the clinical trial, specifically the randomised control trial, put your hand up now. Finally, if you think that Martin should stay in the balloon with the mobile phone, put your hands up now. I'm afraid I'm going to count this down in reverse order, and as I do, these people will leave the balloon with their dignity intact. So I'm afraid, remarkably, the lowest scoring is the only person who'd actually bothered to invent something before coming here. So I think it's a grave injustice. I'm afraid Amber with 15, you are out of the balloon. We we're all going to be sorry when she's a copper-infused clothing billionaire and doesn't sponsor the next balloon debate and hates us all and lets us die of preventable infection. We're all going to be sorry, that's what I'm going to say. Next lowest scoring, I'm afraid, was Tim with the book. So have you got a book on how to build a parachute?
I don't. I just got a very big book with lots of leaves.
Well, okay, well maybe you can hold it over your head and float down to the ground. So bad luck, Tim. I'm afraid also out of the balloon with 22 votes. Is Simon with the clinical trial.
Well, I hope none of you get ill.
Yeah. So we are down to. There's some actually. I think that these 3 surviving inventions are all quite closely related because we have language, Marconi's radio telegraph, and the mobile telephone, all of which are quite closely allied. I don't know whether this is going to make for a more or less satisfying final fight to the death. So what happens now is you get another minute each to try and clinch the argument. The audience get one more chance to vote, and I really hope this one doesn't come down to an arm wrestle, because I feel that now we've essentially voted for the primacy of human communication. Then to reduce it to physical challenge would be a travesty. So I'm now going to let you speak in reverse order of how many votes you got. First up, with language, using language in your own defence, you have a minute starting now. Dominic.
Okay, the only point of substance made against language so far has been that language has no single inventor. Well, neither have your inventions. They all built on the inventions of other people using language. Number 2, language is vital to using tools, to making new tools. We are the only species to do that, and without that, we don't have creativity. Final point, language is vital to transforming societies. We understand the relationship of the person to the subject to the object. I make hand axe is revolutionary. Bees make beehives, but they never make better beehives. We can use language to transform our societies, and I have every confidence you will go forwards after this debate and use language to transform the world we live in.
Rousing, inspiring, factually wrong. I don't think bees do actually make beehives. So next up, with a total of 40 votes from the first round, and Marconi's radio telegraph. You have 1 minute, Emily.
Okay, so this debate is about celebrating the ingenuity, the imagination, the vision and the agency of the human being. So we do need a person, we do need an inventor, not an amorphous cloud of unknown souls over many generations. If you were on a little raft in the middle of the ocean, drifting about in complete darkness alone, what would be of most use to you? Okay, sure, it might be the mobile phone, but the mobile phone only works because of Marconi's radio telegraph. Otherwise, there's no mobile phone. And language, of course, you need the language to communicate to someone out there, but it is rendered useless without the means by which to actually talk to that person. So, I think the ability to communicate wirelessly at the speed of light, this shrinking of the world, the global village, the idea of a universal human culture, bringing everyone together, that is what truly makes the radio telegraph the greatest invention.
Excellent. So finally, narrowly leading the first round with 43 votes on the mobile phone, Martin.
Lifts people out of poverty. It also saves young love. 1980, I was a student in London. I had a summer job. My girlfriend was a student in London. She had a summer job. We arranged to meet for lunch, Chancery Lane tube station. I waited. 55 minutes later, she appeared saying, "Where were you?" And of course, there were two entrances to Chancery Lane tube station. Had we but known, had we but had a mobile phone, we could have rung each other up. We wouldn't have had the row. We wouldn't have split up. So it saves young love. And I'm over it now. It saves young love, and it lifts the poor out of poverty. What could be sweeter than that? Thank you.
Now this time you get just one vote, because this is only one person is staying in the balloon. Your choice is who should that one person be? Should it be Dominic with language? Should it be Emily with Marconi's radio telegraph? Or should it be Martin with his mobile phone and his long-ago girlfriend that he's really over, honestly? So, who thinks that Dominic with language should stay in the balloon and be the last survivor? Okay, who thinks that Emily should stay in the balloon with the radio telegraph and be the last survivor? And who thinks that Martin, with his sorrowful tale of young love and of emancipating the fishermen of somewhere on the other side of the world, should stay in the balloon with the mobile phone? Put your hands up now if you think it should be him. So, that means that, I'm afraid, Dominic and Martin, you are both out of the balloon. Yeah. And our winner of the best invention ever is Marconi.